Now is Mike Davis, President and CEO of Article 3 Project, Jason Chaffetz, Fox News contributor. All right, both of you. He continued to struggle. I want to stay on this issue. When you hear it, it just makes your blood boil. He continued to struggle in the Her interview back in 2023, October, about when his son died, and then when Trump actually came into office. Watch.
You know, 1 month ago died. God, May 30th. 2015. Was it 2015 he died?
2015.
I think it's 2015.
Or, yeah, I'm not sure the months are, but I think it was.
Yeah.
That's right, Mr. President.
And what's happened in the meantime is that Trump gets elected in November of 2017? 2016. All right. So, what do I have 2017 here?
That's when you left office, January of 2017.
Okay. But that's when Trump gets sworn in, then,
Right.
January.
Right. Correct.
Okay, yeah. And in 2017, Beau had passed, and this is personal.
Okay, watching this, Jason, you know who I want to talk to? I want to talk to Jeffrey Zients. I want to talk to Jake Sullivan. I want to talk to the press secretaries. I want to talk to all the senators who met with Biden, because all of them knew this and all of them lied about it.
Yeah.
It's staggering to watch this.
Yeah.
I find it absolutely beyond.
It's so selfish and so self-absorbed. This is the United States of America. There's a potential for a nuclear war at a moment's notice. We got Russians and Chinese coming after us. This guy can't figure out when his own son passed away, when Donald Trump was elected. And there are people that are culpable. And it starts, I think, with Jill Biden, because she is at the top of the food chain. She is seeing that. It also goes to the White House counsel's office. They have a legal and fiduciary duty to this country that goes well beyond making sure that they can fill in the blanks as to when people passed away. Ed Siskel and Rachel Cotton, these should be common. These are names within the White House. They were there filling in the blanks for the president. They don't feel like there's a duty to tell the Attorney General, to tell the cabinet, to tell the senior leaders, the Gang of Eight, what's really going on here. That is totally selfish, and I think it's just so un-American. We really have to get to the bottom of all those that are culpable.
Yeah. Mike, I think Congress has to bring them all up. I mean, it's one thing to read the transcript. We're all lawyers. It's one thing to read the transcript, and that's all well and good. And it was embarrassing. It was bad. But to hear Biden, to go into the room with Biden, is a totally different matter. And you pump up that audio a little, and we have to pump it up so people can hear. But it's shocking. The man could not function, and yet they were pushing him through the motions, hiding him, calling lids, keeping him away from certain staffers, not returning phone calls of certain cabinet members. That was happening.
Yeah, I mean, this is sad and terrifying. And it's, as you said, Laura, it's the biggest scandal in American political history. We saw Joe Biden when they could prop him up at his best and he was bad. Who knew that it was this bad? It's very clear that Joe Biden was not in control of Joe Biden. So who was in control of Joe Biden?
Well, who was president of the United States? I mean, the press wants to do all these tell-all books and, I got 5 interviews, people on the record telling me they were scared and he should be in a wheelchair. And Jason, how bad does all that look now with this audio, the way he sounded?
Well,
how bad does that look?
We've only heard 4 minutes. There are hours worth of tapes over 2 days.
Yeah.
And you know, James Comer today announced that the Oversight Committee is going to dive into who is really running the auto pen. You know, the Oversight Project was on top of this early, of which I'm involved with. And I got to tell you, whoever had their pulse on that auto pen, they were the acting president of the United States. Because this guy literally cannot figure out what year Donald Trump became the president of the United States.
And these guys, by the way, all the Democrats all week long, for actually weeks and weeks, they've been saying that Trump's an embarrassment to the country. How many times did they say that over the last 4 months? He's destroying our standing in the world, right? He's destroying the United States, the aura of the United States. It'll never be repaired. How many times have we heard the foreign policy establishment and the Democrats say that? He's a dictator. He likes dictators. And yet this was president? That's okay? Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Congress needs to call in every one of these cabinet members because they had a constitutional duty under the 25th Amendment to make sure that our president was mentally fit to serve, and they were clearly covering up for the president. That they violated their constitutional oaths.
Every single one of them, Jason, because every single one of them either knew or it was a gross dereliction of duty. The oath that they took was to uphold and faithfully execute the laws of the United States, uphold the Constitution. I don't think any of those top dogs in that White House, as smart as some of them are, I think Jake Sullivan's not a dumb person. Zients is not a dumb person. They knew what was going on. The intent is obvious. They did not want to reveal to the country the truth about the commander-in-chief of the United States.
You've been in the White House. It is steps away from the Oval Office and from upstairs. And so there are people like the National Security Advisor, Nadine Tandon, who was staff secretary. She had dual role, not only as domestic policy advisor, but she could also help control where the signatures flow. And so these are the types of people that absolutely every single one of them should be called before Congress. They should go in for transcribed interviews or depositions and have to go on the record. What did they see and when did they see it? We can also talk about the media and them totally not doing their job. But there are people there who are paid by the taxpayers to protect the United States of America. They were protecting Jill and Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. They weren't protecting the best interests of America.
No, the media was focused on January 6th, Charlottesville, their narrative.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.